Writing a season of Legend of Korra is it's a long process. One of the broad strokes was the idea of a civil war between the North and South. It was an idea Bryan and I had thrown around for book 1 that didn't quite make it into that story. We thought that would be the main thrust of the whole season, but as the writers came in, we were throwing around more ideas. Doing more with the spirit world came up, and once we had the character of Unalaq, I think, too, talking about him being more tapped into spiritual stuff and developed from there.
Yeah, I think we knew, even at the beginning of book 1, that Korra's journey was mainly going to be a spiritual one for all of her arcs. Even though we had this big political war idea, this civil war, when Mike and the writers were kicking ideas around, they really came to realize, oh, we could tie this in with her spiritual journey as well, and that's part of the main conflicts. Sometimes we have real specifics that we might not know how we get there or what's in between, but we sort of have that tentpole idea. There's always like the framework and then new ideas. A character like Varric, we might not have had the idea for him right away, but he ends up coming into play and having a lot to do with the plot.
Yeah, and the main thing we always try to do is make sure all those various characters all have a way of feeding into the main storyline that's going on in the show. So even though the Varric stuff seems kind of separate at first, it does tie into the Civil War and then later into, you know, what's going on with Unalaq. The Juan backstory and then Vaatu being the bad guy weren't there in the very beginning. We do what's called a pitch out, where we put on index cards every beat of the story, 3 acts per episode.
And that's done in the writer's room with
kind
everybody.
of as a group.
Yeah.
The writer of that episode will do an outline where it's more just like a description of here's the scene, here's what's gonna happen, maybe some sample dialogue. And then once the outline's done, they do write the first draft of the script where it's all the dialogue and action descriptions. We project the script on the wall, and sometimes we pitch out different jokes, or, oh, this section isn't working quite right, let's rewrite some of this dialogue.
Once we have the script, we have the record. We bring in the actors, and Andrea Romano's our voice director. Mike and the writers sit in the room with her in the recording studio. Some people call it like a radio play. It's just the voices, and that gives our directors and our supervisors and storyboard artists some dialogue to work with so they can figure out the acting, and they're interpreting the script and interpreting the performances of the actors.
Yeah, and they storyboard out that entire episode. Storyboards can be hundreds of pages long, and it's each pose of a character, different acting poses, or if it's an action scene, those are usually very thoroughly drawn out.
You're planning each shot, each camera setup, each background, the staging of the characters, if they're gonna move in the scene, if we're gonna cut to a new scene, cut to a close-up, all of that stuff doesn't exist, and it's not like we can just bring cameras on the set and capture performances. You know, they have to interpret the script and visualize it. We then take the storyboards and we merge it together with the dialogue, and we make an animatic, which is like a rough black and white, non-animated version of the show. It gives us a good sense of how it's playing. Is it clear? Is it too long? Is it funny? Is it emotional? Whatever it is, we're just always refining it. When we have the animatic, we know if everything's gonna fit, because every episode has to be the same length. We take that animatic and we send it to the animation studio, and then they know how long each shot is and what poses the character should be in at a certain point in their dialogue, if they hit a word with a certain pose, what the action is. But then the animators, they add a ton to it, and we give them room to figure out a lot of the timing. They always do great embellishments and augmentations to what we've plotted out in the storyboards. Most people in this day and age, they just think everything's done by computers, and we certainly use computers. We even draw on the computers here stateside, but we're still drawing. It's still by hand, but the animators still draw with pencil on paper traditionally, and each episode has about 15,000 finished animation drawings per 22-minute episode. It's a ton of work, but we use computers to color each cell. They used to be cells, but we just call them that now. They're just digital files when they scan the drawing. And then since Avatar, we've kind of fancied up our compositing process. We have 3D models, usually vehicles, that we can move in space, these complex models more easily. and drawing by hand, but we have to combine that with 2D animation, and crazy parallax camera moves, and add lighting and atmosphere and all sorts of kind of fancy things that are easier to do digitally. You know, you'd think these things would make stuff easier, but once we have the potential, we just make it as hard as we can on ourselves. Oh, how much more sophisticated can we make it look, or more cinematic?
We get all the footage back from the overseas studio, and we edit it to the final locked picture, and then our composer and sound designer take that, do their magic. Every sound has to be created. There's nothing there when they start. They have an amazingly hard job to do in a very short amount of time because they're the last step of the process.
We have a spotting session. We sit with the sound designer, the Foley artist, and the composer, and we say, well, this is what we're thinking for this scene, and we really want you to hit this sound, or this is the emotion, this is the psychology behind the scene that we feel should be supported by the music. They just have a couple weeks per episode, back to back to back, to crank out all of that stuff. And then meanwhile, we're still fixing footage. The animation's very complex, so there's always little technical things that need to be fixed, and sometimes we have creative things that need to be fixed. We do color correction on the picture, and we change the tint and the contrast levels and add lighting effects, and then we mix the dialogue, the Foley, which is like the natural sounds, with the sound effects, which is like the crazy bending and explosions, with the music. And we marry that all together in a big fancy mixing studio, and then it's finished. And it's funny, I think the fans think that we just have a stockpile of finished episodes, but it takes us so long to make these things that we're still finishing them up almost right until they go on the air. It's a very long, tedious, complicated process. We have amazing artists and staff that make it better at each stage. Book 2 and Book 3, timeline-wise, are much closer together. It's just a few weeks between them, but a lot changed at the end of Book 2 that sets the stage for Book 3. Korra decided to leave the spirit portals open for the first time in 10,000 years. So that means spirits can more easily flow into the physical world, and humans, if they choose, can physically enter the spirit world, and you can travel from the North Pole to the South Pole in a matter of a minute. Harmonic convergence was a major event where this crazy spirit energy, we saw it wash over the entire globe and pass through everything and every person. So it remains to be seen what effects that had on people in the world. There was quite a bit of destruction from the crazy battle between giant spirit Korra and Unavatu. And Unavatu did this thing where he caused all these spirit vines to grow. So now there's this thing where we have this giant metropolis, but there's these crazy like jungle vines growing over huge sections of it, where these spirit wilds, like from Juan's time, have kind of cropped up throughout the city. And now there's gonna be spirits hanging out in those, and so a lot has changed, and it's only a few weeks later, so it's like, what is this gonna mean for Republic City and for Korra and her friends and the whole world?
At the end of Book 2, we see that Varric is miraculously saved by a spirit vine crashing through his prison, and he and Julie escape on the crazy winged contraption. So he's out, he's on the lam. He might crop up again, you never know.
Can't count Varric out.